eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. Thank you, Rosemary, for reminding us that God's eyes are always on us. This Romans text was intriguing to me. And I've read it before, but not this closely. I love it because it's an inclusive statement of Paul's faith. All of us who are Christians should have, must have, a testament of our faith. If we don't, we need to have a long talk with God. Then after or during that talk, we must reflect back to Romans 10, which speaks to how to get one's salvation. Beginning at verse 9, it says, if you confess with your mouth or lips, as some interpretations say, that Jesus is Lord, and we believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, then you will be saved. This is Paul's foundational belief. Is it yours? I know it's mine. So Romans 11 is intriguing. Why? Because Paul is presenting this rhetoric as an attorney. You know, I have put Paul on trial before. I love doing so. Paul is asking in this letter whether God has rejected the people. Directly after he's telling the folks in Romans 10 that salvation is made available by God through Christ. All you have to do is confess with your mouth and believe in your heart. He's saved. You're saved. And so Paul then turns around and says, well, has God rejected us? That's why the sermon title, Lately, Have You Felt Rejected? Lately, have you felt rejected? Now, I must admit, I thought this sermon would resonate with many people. You know, sometimes we preachers have a feeling in our hearts that this is going to be a humdinger. We're going to knock this out of the park. Since during these past weeks, with the events taking place in Charlottesville, Virginia, and in Spain, we are observing how hate and not love is being demonstrated among people. And because some folks may not feel that God is answering prayers regarding their requests made, their requests submitted, they're surrendering to the Holy One for certain things. So being excited about this text, I offered tidbits to at least 3 people, and they said, no, I don't feel rejected by life or God. One said, it isn't rejection I'm feeling, but a better word is being unappreciated or underappreciated by a family, by my family, with all that I do for them, the sacrifices made on their behalf. Then I thought, oh goodness, where do I go from here? Feeling let down, that's me, I'm talking about me, and rejected with this text, I thought, maybe this text does expose what's going on inside all of us. But we're calling our feelings by a different name. A different name beyond that of rejection. Why does Paul make this statement about rejection? Was he questioning his faith? Had he lost his faith? The answer is a resounding no. But isn't it something that a man who was determined to destroy the Jews, those who had become Christ-like Christians, had now become the person who was either starting churches on behalf of Christ or encouraging those churches he didn't start? All because of his experience with Christ on the Damascus Road. And Paul brings up the word rejection. He clearly understands, or is the epitome of the word, from both sides. First, he has lived to be the rejector. He was killing Christians. He was right there at the stoning of Stephen. Held the people's coats, their jackets, when they were throwing stones at Stephen, the person who was preaching on behalf of Jesus. Then, at times, now that he has come to Christ, and he's a representative of Christ, he has been rejected as the voice of Christ. He has been feeling it from both ways. So if any of you all can't connect to the word rejection in the text, let's still explore this intriguing text and see how it can help us today. We can't ever lose hope, although at times things appear to be going wrong around us, no matter how we name it or classify it. And as Christians, we can't ever think or believe there aren't enough of us to hold up the banner of God. Do you know how we hold up the banner of God? We witness. This little one this morning witnessed how God helped her get over the fear of snakes. Whether I agree with it or not, whether you agree, she has testified that God has helped her. We are testimonies with our lives. That's how we hold up the banner of God. So, our text says, God always has a remnant. I have many quilters and seamstresses and other folks who know their ways around fabric and sewing machines. I am not one of them. In 7th grade, I took home ec. And in June, after my 7th grade year, I promised God I will never take home ec again. And when my mother tried to teach me how to sew because she was a great seamstress, I always found excuses not to be at her feet. Oh, my stomach. Oh, my homework. Girl, it's August. What? You all don't get it? You'll get it when you get home. Anything to get out of learning how to sew. But when you're a real seamstress, a real quilter, you hold on to pieces, remnants of fabric, for use at a later time. Am I right? I see Evelyn nodding her head. Thank you, Evelyn. Paul is reminding folks that God always has he has, she has, whatever your comfort level is, a remnant. God holds on to God's people. God had a remnant during the days of Israel and Elijah. God had a remnant during the days of Paul. God has a remnant during this 21st century. As Christians, we are the remnant in Christ. We are the believers. We who are the believers are the remnant. We who are the worshipers are the remnant. We who are the prayers are the remnant. And as a remnant, we may feel like Elijah at times, that all had been lost with the killing of God's prophets and the tearing down of God's altars. Today, we can equate that to the lack of justice for all people, inadequate leaders, the tearing down of God's altars, the tearing down of God's prophets, the lack of safety for all people, senseless murders, the lack of quality of life for all people, the isms, the sexism, the racism, the ageism, the youth, any type of ism you can name. But like God told Elijah, and here in this Romans text, as Paul is reiterating, God has reserved God's people who have not sold out. The question is, have any of you all sold out in any kind of way? Those people in this 21st century, all of you and me, we are God's Christian remnant if we have not sold out. And you have to ask yourselves the question, how have I sold out? That's between you and God. So through Paul's statement of faith and this intriguing text, we see that first, God doesn't reject. I think I'm preaching against the text. God didn't reject Israel. Israel sinned against God, and this caused a disconnect in the divine-human relationship. God doesn't reject 21st century human beings, but when we sin against God, this causes a disconnect in the divine-human relationship. God doesn't reject us. We reject God with sin. Next, it's all about choice. Although the text says that God caused a sluggish spirit so that eyes cannot see and ears cannot hear, it's truly from the pulpit to the pew, our choices in life that causes us not to see and recognize God. You remember God gives us free will and free choice. You do know that. Free will. Do you know that? Free will. You do know that. Free will and free choice. God doesn't want any of God's people to miss out on salvation, but people's choices will make them miss out on salvation and God's love. We can say that God's eyes on the sparrow. We can say that there's a balm in Gilead. We can say all of this stuff. But unless we have a relationship, a true relationship with God, it's all about choice. And finally, thank God for grace. That word grace says it all. Unmerited favor. Nothing we can do, no matter how much we work in the church, but it's based upon God's love for us in spite of ourselves. I can't speak for you. I can only speak for myself. I know I am ordained, called by God to be a pastor, to be clergy, to be minister. But there are times when I sin and fall short of the mark. But because of God's grace, because of God's love, in spite of myself, I can thank God for grace. Rejection by God? No. So I'm in agreement with Paul, yes I am, in his argument. Do you want to be a remnant as selected by God because of your choice to accept God's grace by the one who created grace? The answer is yours. And if your answer is yes, then any feelings of rejection you may have, or any feelings of unappreciation or underappreciation you may have, or if you can't name that feeling you are having, but you know that something is just not right, know that it's not final because God's grace is sufficient. You remember Paul had that thorn in his side. We don't know what that thorn was. And he prayed 3 times, and God didn't answer the prayer. But what did God say? My grace is what? Sufficient. That's what we have to bank on. That's what we have to hold on to. God's grace is sufficient. And when I got finished with this sermon, I said, God, because I struggled with it. And I said, you don't reject us. We reject you. We reject you with our sins. We reject you when we don't trust you. We reject you when we lose our faith. That's how we reject you. So lately, have you been feeling rejected? If not, great. But if you have, I admonish you to go back to God and say that you're sorry. Because with everything that was going on these past weeks, I have felt rejected. Because I have been praying to God to heal this land. I have been praying to God to help us love more. I have been praying to God for all of our leaders, not just our president, but every leader to get some sense. Get some sense. And then I thought about, God, what am I doing? Help me to get some sense to do what. And I was giving up until I spoke to someone yesterday. And they said, you know that God is faithful. You know that God is faithful. And answers to prayers may not come at the time we hoped for, prayed for, or whatever. But his eye is on the sparrow. There is a balm in Gilead. The balm is the healing power of Jesus' peace that holds us, that tells us it may not be the way we want it right now, but I'm walking with you, and I'm talking with you, and I am with you. There is a balm in Gilead. There's a healing that comes from God. And when you hold on to that, all hell may be going on around you, but you still have God's peace.